What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen as usual. And today I am very excited to bring you an interview, discussion, conversation, whatever you'd like to call it, with a journalist from the US who I have great respect for. And I've been following his work for quite some time. His name is Dan Cohen. And without further ado, let's get to the chat. All right, Dan, welcome to the show. We're finally able to connect. Thanks for coming on the show. I think we've, to just mention to the audience, I think we've known each other online since October. We've been going back and forth with each other, haven't we?
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's when I kind of dove into some of the, U.S.-China Cold War issues, and we first connected. But really good to be with you. Glad you invited me on.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, you were really busy then. I saw how much content you were putting out. You were putting out quite a lot of really good content then. But now you're a new father, just as of recently, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. So if you hear some screaming in the background, that's not like a CIA torture site. That's my little girl who's now just over a month old. So it's what a crazy time to be to become a father. So
I want to talk about that in a second. But maybe before we continue, maybe you can just give a really brief introduction to who you are, what you do, and that kind of stuff to the audience.
Sure. So I'm an American journalist, and I guess I'd call myself a filmmaker. I've been reporting since 2014. I spent 3 years from 2014 to 2017 in Israel, Palestine, and did a lot of reporting there, and spent a lot of time in the Gaza Strip. And it was there during the 2014 Israeli war in Gaza, and made a documentary about that called Killing Gaza, which I have to get Mandarin subtitles on. I haven't done that, but that's a really good idea because obviously there's a huge audience. So I made that documentary, and I worked for RT America for a few years, which Russian media, and now I work for an outlet that's also partially RT funded called In the Now, and I'm working on another documentary about the Israeli right wing. And so that's my work. And then I'm, I kind of cover a range of geopolitical issues, whatever it may be. A lot of stuff about the Middle East, but I mean, more and more, I'm very interested in China, for obvious reasons. I mean, we're in, like it or not, I mean, I'd say not, but we're in, some kind of Cold War, and it's really dangerous. And right now it's actually even killing people in the U.S. So, it's something we can get into more, but.
Yeah, exactly. And this will be a bit of an awkward backstep, but I just wanted to finish on that because right now what we're all going through, we obviously finished it here. Things are starting to heat up there for you, is the whole coronavirus situation. And I wondered, just on the topic of having a baby during this time, was that really, because I mean, for us, our youngest, he just turned 1-year-old 2 days ago. And we were really worried. Obviously, it's getting more and more apparent that this doesn't affect kids as much. But was that really nerve-wracking for you guys to be kind of having this during this time?
Well, we actually planned to have the birth during the pandemic.
No,
it's definitely scary. Thank God that this virus doesn't really affect babies and children. Though it still can. So, I'm still being extremely cautious, and I've been pretty well ahead of the curve of most Americans, in terms of hygiene, washing hands. I mean, I wear a mask outside, this kind of thing, which almost nobody does, though more and more people do here in the last week or so. But yeah, I mean, it's really scary. I also have my in-laws from Spain here. And so we had this really difficult decision about a week ago. They came for the birth, and it was like, well, do we send them back to Spain? Spain obviously is in really bad shape right now. And so we just decided to keep them here, not knowing that, how things are going to turn out. So far, Washington, at least from what we know, doesn't appear to be one of the epicenters in the U.S. Obviously, New York City especially is, and that's only a few hours away. And certainly things could change in Washington, but we're basically holed up in my house. I go to the grocery store, I do the necessary things as little as possible, but we're kind of in a way, it's like we're already quarantined in the home with the newborn. Right. So it's not that different, but at the same time, it's very scary, and we just don't have any visitors now. So
So,
it's a really insecure time, definitely.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, in terms of supplies, getting the things you need, toilet paper, can you get all this stuff? Is it okay where you are?
I bought a fair amount of toilet paper basically before everyone else. I didn't like hoard it like one of these insane people.
You knew? Did you know this was going to happen, or you were just like you do your toilet paper shopping once every couple months?
No, I mean, I knew. I was kind of, I was paying attention. Where most Americans, our media was like mocking China and sneering at China for the measures it was taking to contain the virus. I don't know if we're saying it or not, but I was paying attention, and I was like, I know this is going to come here, and pretty soon we're going to be confronting it. And so I was just going and stocking up. I got some cases of bottled water, which is another issue because you'd think you can drink the tap water, but here in DC, and especially in the older homes, we have lead pipes. And so there's been major issues after around 2002. For a few years, there's major issues with people, getting lead poisoning and this kind of thing. And so I have to have bottled water, especially with a newborn.
Right.
And so, I'm stocked up pretty well. I could last a couple of weeks if, supply chains were totally shut down. But I mean, when I go to the grocery store now, there are significant lines, and there are many items that are just missing from the shelves. If you have, fortunate timing when, after a truck has, delivered food and, all kinds of things, then you're okay, but you just never know. And because there's no centralized system or anything, people can just hoard. So, you'll go somewhere and they don't have any bleach, but they have a lot of paper towels. And so somebody's bought a whole bunch of bleach, and then you go to another place and it's, vice versa. And so it's like one person has all the bleach, one person has all the paper towels.
You all need to get together and have some sort of a trading post somewhere.
Exactly. So it's like every man for themselves here, and it's really just a bad way to operate.
The saddest video I saw was of a video that went viral of a mother who wanted to buy diapers, and she knew that people were just buying it all up. She didn't have the financial ability to buy a bunch of packs all at once. And then when she was ready to restock, to buy another one pack again, because that's how she has to buy them, she was just crying in the grocery store saying, I can't do this. Like, what am I supposed to do?
That's so brutal. I can't even imagine that. And I know there's a lot of people around here who are in that very situation. Millions of people in this country who are facing that.
It's really sad. It really is sad. Yeah. But it's unprecedented times we're in. We've never seen or faced anything like this. Hopefully, everybody can learn something from it. And there's a lot of important questions, I think, that have come from this that we need to ask ourselves in terms of how society operates and everything like that. But I want to go on to one of the more main topics that I wanted to talk about, or at least the thing that brought us together, which was your Hong Kong video. And when I saw that Hong Kong video that you did, it was really amazing, and I really connected with it, not only because it was so well put together, it was well presented, but because for months I had been speaking about the Hong Kong protests and the ridiculousness of how Western media was covering it. And it was just beyond ridiculous. But there weren't many other non-Chinese people standing up against it and talking about it. So it was a lonely space. And then when I saw your video, I was like, what's going on here? There's another non-Chinese who gets it, who understands it. And so what I want to know is, like, what got you onto that project? What was it like, the process? What was the feeling like when you uncovered some of the shocking details about it? Just tell me a little bit about the whole experience.
Well, I mean, I feel like it was so obvious, to anyone who's, just paying attention to at least what I saw on Twitter. It's like if you read the New York Times or you watch CNN or any of this stuff. It's just freedom fighters versus the totalitarian, communist dictatorship, and that's it. But I just saw all these like snuff videos on Twitter where it's just like these, masked mobs are just beating people senseless. And it's kind of like what Republicans in this country say Antifa is, where it's, Antifa is the anti-fascists, like basically street groups that confront like far right, like neo-Nazi groups, which, whatever you think of them, it's basically what they say. They say that there are these, dangerous mobs who are just attacking basically innocent people. And that's basically what we saw in Hong Kong. And so I don't know. Part of working for foreign media is I can say whatever I want. You can't do that. Even if you say you work for some mainstream outlet in the US and you see this stuff, you just know that there's no point in even trying to go after it. And so I have this freedom that basically other reporters don't have. And I pay attention, to geopolitics especially. And so I did an investigation into the attempted coup in Venezuela, where the U.S. basically announced that Juan Guaido, this, unknown guy, is president. And so I exposed him and, showed he's basically trained by a CIA cutout. And so it's like I'm always looking for the next kind of, U.S. plot wherever on the globe. And Hong Kong, I felt like I was actually late on. Like I was surprised that no one else, or at least that I wasn't, I was aware of in English language media, was kind of exposing this whole thing. And so, it just took a little bit of research. I talked to a few people who kind of knew the material, knew the landscape better than I do, but it seemed like, you have these masked mobs waving flags that say President Trump, please liberate us, and waving American flags. I mean, they kind of overplayed their hand a little bit. It was so blatantly obvious.
They kept getting more and more and more bold, like, where it was like, really, how can you top this? And then you've got some of the protesters flying to testify in front of Congress. It's like it got to a point where it's like, holy crap, can you imagine if during Occupy Wall Street or the Hawaii independence protests, you had a bunch of them flying over to Beijing and saying, okay, how can we penalize the US? How can you help us? Oh my God, could you imagine the response from America? And maybe even they'd be taken in for treason for that. But like, it just, they were getting away with it, and the Western media wasn't saying anything, and it just kept going further and further and further. The first time I actually saw the Western media saying something, or at least starting, and they didn't do it in a significant way, saying, oh, there's a problem with these protesters, was after the coronavirus stuff started, when you started seeing the signs they were saying, like how they were villainizing mainland Chinese and the words they were using. That's when you saw a couple of outlets come out and say, oh, we're seeing a little bit of the dark side of these protesters come out. But yeah, they just kept pushing it, didn't they?
I did see a little bit when they occupied the airport back in like August, and that was right around my article came out in August too, and honestly I had no idea that it was gonna. I wrote an article for the Gray Zone Project, and the video that I did was basically taking the same material, kind of more opinion, but I mean, to me that was such a shocking moment, and as much as mainstream Western media tried to like hide that, it was so blatant that what they did. I remember they were like, oh, we regret beating those journalists and detaining people in the airport and this kind of thing. And it was just so shocking that it was impossible, so they had to kind of like do these pseudo apologies, and Western media ran with it. But I mean,
do you know, I want to just ask too, the guy, the old man who was lit on fire also, he was just trying to stop the and it took him months and months and months to recover. And he didn't even recognize his daughter when he was in the hospital. He was scared when people approached him. He's out now, and you just see he is totally transformed. Did that or does it continue to get any coverage saying this happened in Hong Kong?
No,
that was like,
that did not break through Western media bubble, the like shield, the Iron Dome over our heads at all. That was like totally ignored. And when I saw that, that actually, basically the same kind of thing happened in Venezuela. So, basically, I mean, these are essentially in Venezuela, I mean, and in Hong Kong, the U.S. is deeply involved if it's, the U.S. hand is behind these. And there was what they call guarimbas in Venezuela, where it's basically, disaffected youth who are in the street, trying to shut down the economy, just wreak as much havoc as they can. And they're often, like in Hong Kong, there's a lot of racism. And in Venezuela, they actually took a black supporter of the government, a Chavista, they call him, a supporter of the Chavez movement, and set him on fire and killed him. This young man died. And so when I saw that in Hong Kong, I mean, it was like, this is the same tactic where they just take people and set them on fire. So as shocking as that was, I was not surprised by it at all. And I was also not surprised that Western media totally ignored it.
Yeah, it's really concerning. So they had their district council elections, and the Democratic parties won most of the seats. And they look at that. People call it a landslide victory because it was like over 80% of the seats or something like that. But when you actually look at the numbers, it was something like 54% voted for pro-democracy or anti-establishment, whatever you want to call it, seats. So there's a large percentage of the population. Close to half, not quite half, but that really disagree with this movement, and they couldn't speak up. They wouldn't dare speak up. I've got friends who, one of the despicable things is one of my friends, he noticed when he took his mother in for cancer treatment into one of the hospitals, doctors and nurses were wearing political badges, like the 5 demands things and stuff like that, which is so unprofessional to bring that into a workplace like that. And one of my friends who works in the hospital system, she's I never wanted to know her opinion on it because I was afraid. She's a family friend for over 20 years. And this is the kind of stuff that divides people. And so I never said anything with her. I never wanted to know her opinion because I didn't want us to ruin our friendship. But she ended up seeing one of my videos that went viral on Facebook amongst the Hong Kong groups. And she reached out to me to say to me, I like what you're doing, and I can't say anything in the hospital. I wouldn't dare say it. I had an artist, a Hong Kong artist, who came over and did a show kind of halfway between all that stuff was happening. And when she was here, she invited me over to the gallery, and she was talking, and she says, "Oh, now I'm in Shenzhen. I feel so free. I can say whatever I want," which is such an irony. She's come over to the mainland side and finally can say anything that she wants. It was crazy.
Right. No, that looked like a really terrifying time. I mean, where it's, anybody could just be beaten at any time. I mean, it was like some kind of like zombie. I don't know. It was like a zombie movie or something where it's like these crowds, these mobs would just beat people for anything. I mean, I remember that horrifying video of the, I think it was like a street cleaner who got hit with a brick in the head and died. And
died. Yep.
I mean, it was just like every day I would see like 2 or 3 videos, and I know that's just what's basically being translated into English and what makes it, into my Twitter sphere.
Yeah. Do you know that when that happened, his son came out, and a pro-Beijing group or pro-establishment, whatever you want to call it, they were speaking to his son. And his son was speaking to them in Mandarin because the group was in Mandarin, speaking Mandarin. And some of the journalists in Hong Kong, they did these tweets, and so much of their tweet was dedicated to saying that this grieving son was speaking Mandarin and to a pro-Beijing group, as if it made it, less of a terrible crime. And the response even to that, to try to marginalize the death of this man through the fact that his son was speaking Mandarin, really spoke volumes also.
Yeah, it's just really gross. I mean, there are parallels we can make, in this country of white supremacy, which there's a long history of, and xenophobia and racism that is obvious. To me, it was really obvious. And learning about that was actually really fascinating and helped me kind of understand the Hong Kong mainland dynamic in a way that I really didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I want to get back to that whole race dynamic or culture dynamic in a second. But the thing is, what is remarkable is how well they controlled the narrative, how well they made people ignore that part of it. There was one guy, there was a vlogger named Toby Gu, who came over to Hong Kong from Canada. He's an Asian Canadian. And he came specifically to cover the police violence, all of the violence from the police. And the first night, what he found was mobs of people beating up I think it was a Mandarin speaking or somebody who disagreed with the crowd, like beating him up really seriously. And he couldn't find any of this police brutality. He says, "Oh my God, is this what's happening?" And he posted it online with very little commentary. He says, "This is what I saw." He instantly got death threats from so many people in Hong Kong, and he was hiding up in his hotel room for, I think it was 36 hours. And then what happened was there's another guy, the owner of Hong Kong Free Press, which is funded by a bunch of NGOs and things like that. He came out to add a little bit of fuel to this fire. And he said, this guy is coming pretending to be a journalist, and posted his pictures on his Twitter and said, if you see him, confront him. Already, when he already has death threats. And what this guy did, all this guy did was catch a scene that the Hong Kong Free Press and everybody else has been trying so hard to cover up.
Right.
So there were really violent mechanisms in place to try to protect this narrative. They knew that they had people fooled, and they would go to extreme lengths to make sure that they protected that narrative.
Right. No, it's so obvious that it's there's such a huge amount of media manipulation going on, where it's like the dissonance between what I would see on television here and then what I would see on Twitter from accounts that are showing counter narrative. It's like, okay, obviously the television narrative is not telling the whole story here, and then it's basically comes down to activists on Twitter trying to show like the other side and kind of show the whole thing of what's really happening. I mean, to me, how media operated, it's not journalism, it's propaganda. And it's all about, furthering the goals of really the US in Hong Kong in terms of destabilizing it as long as possible, weakening it, weakening China as much as it can in any way possible. And it's kind of, it just shows how coordinated the whole thing is and how so many so-called journalists are just so eager to act as propagandists in order to kind of, go with this to like fulfill, I don't know, some kind of like Cold War fantasy that they have.
Yeah, it really is amazing, isn't it? Like I connected with somebody recently named, I believe is Piers Robinson, and he's a co-director of propaganda studies at a university. And he was talking about something interesting that, in these countries that more practice censorship, almost he didn't say it in these exact words, but where it's there. It's almost like transparent censorship. The people of those societies know better about the limitations of their media. But in the West, we're so convinced that the media is so separated from political power and it's so free that's even more dangerous. Where we think we have free thought, we don't think we're being fooled, and we're actually even more fooled than the people we're calling brainwashed.
Exactly, it's totally true. Piers is a great guy, good friend too.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
I know him well. He's done incredible work on Syria in particular, and kind of U.S. regime change deceptions on that end. And yeah, I mean, everyone here, we think we have free media. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, Google, all of these kind of social media giants that are, Silicon Valley social media giants, they're very closely connected and basically have their origins in the U.S. government and particularly the CIA, and they essentially are tools of the U.S. government. A friend of mine, Yasha Levine, wrote a really great book called Surveillance Valley that I really recommend. He dives into all of this. It's the secret military history of the internet. And he kind of explains the whole thing. But I mean, there's so much censorship. My article on Juan Guaido, the Venezuela thing, that went viral, but then Google disappeared it. You literally could not find it on Google. The only reason you could find it is because other websites republished it. Yeah, exactly. And so, you'd find it there, but it was like Google just disappeared it. I mean, there's so much censorship in the US.
Yeah. The one that was the most shocking was during the Soleimani incident, where they basically assassinated an Iranian general in Saudi Arabia.
In Iraq.
Not only, in Iraq. He was on his way for a peace talk with Saudi Arabia officials. Yes. So it was remarkable that didn't get out to the news, that he was actually on a peace talk, which could have brought stability to the region. But how that narrative was controlled so much. And that Facebook even had something that came out saying that to comply with U.S. sanctions, they were going to remove people from Iran or anybody who even sympathized with them. And they really controlled that narrative so well. They took it was an official from Syria. They banned him off of Twitter when he started speaking out, or it was the Syrian president, I think
Right.
it was.
Yes.
Banned him off of Twitter when he spoke up and he gave his opinions on it. And then all of a sudden, of all places, of all ironies, they moved to Weibo in China to start having a discussion on the topic, where they started, you had a U.S. Embassy or official with an Syrian official arguing in Chinese on the Chinese internet behind the Great Firewall here because they couldn't do it on Twitter.
Right.
It was like, what has happened here?
Right. Total irony. Yeah. I mean, it's just like so many myths are being destroyed, and I mean, it's like this is kind of the pattern I see in kind of all over the place. Even right now, with with what's happening, is that China is kind of filling the space that the U.S. is leaving behind, and so it's like if the U.S. is going to censor itself, and basically you can't have it as a platform for free speech, then the Chinese alternative is there, and people will use it. And I think that's what's actually happening on all scales.
Yeah, a lot of people are starting to realize, I mean, a lot of Chinese people already knew this, but I'm hearing more foreigners saying, for international politics, Chinese news is way more reliable. They may not concede that for issues within China that it is, but definitely for international issues, because it's tied to a far less foreign policy agenda. Sure, they have the one road, one belt, and they may have some, in that way you can say they have some agenda there, but it's far less aggressive than the foreign policy agenda of places like the U.S., which then have kind of the news agencies surrounding around that narrative. So you end up getting a more raw, authentic, factual report. There was actually a really funny one, too, where it was shared on Twitter and it got a lot of retweets. It was during the early stages of this virus, and it was a North Korean news report where they listed out, they said, this is what's happening, here are the numbers, here are the deaths, here's how it's spreading. No opinion attached to it, just data, just facts. And people were retweeting it saying, wow, this is way more factual, way more just what we need right now. And it's coming from North Korea. And it completely, for people who are willing enough to look at this, evaluate what's wrong here, because there's something wrong here when that's the case.
Yeah, I actually watch a fair amount of CGTN, and when I compare that with like CNN or MSNBC or any of this stuff, I mean, it's not hyper ideological. I mean, clearly there's, I don't even know if I would say an agenda, but there's a perspective. I mean, without a doubt, everything has a perspective, and part of being a media consumer is you have to be able to discern, take different outlets and basically figure out what's what based on different things you read. But when I watch MSNBC, that it's you have basically former CIA heads and FBI and this and that are the national security or correspondents or analysts, and it's like, wait, this is just intelligence, like this is just CIA TV. And so it's like, I don't think the U.S. has any room to criticize, outlets like CGTN or RT, which, if RT International and the Spanish channel actually do really good jobs, and the Arabic channel. I mean, all of those are actually huge around the world, but it's been so demonized in the U.S. Same with CGTN to a lesser degree.
Right. So what do you think then of this whole thing with the journalists being expelled from China? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't follow it extremely closely, which I regret. But I mean, I do think at a point, it's like when journalists are intentionally basically lying in order to, promote foreign policy of another country, I think it's fair to consider. I'm definitely a believer. I definitely believe in free speech, but I do think it can be exploited.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in some examples of that in a moment, because you're absolutely right. But I think, because I saw you retweet something before that happened, And it was a retweet about when the U.S. put restrictions on Chinese media
Exactly.
in the, and you were basically calling out. You said, "Wait until the China does the same thing. It's going to be all the rage." And that's exactly what happened. So China did, because it does look like it was a retaliation.
Oh yeah.
Even from these news outlets that were kicked out from their open letter, even in their open letter to the Chinese government, they said that they recognize that this is retaliation and they don't think they should go down this road. But that's a part that's left out of the conversation a lot too, that it was a retaliation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a tit for tat move. I mean, the CGTN journalists, all the Chinese state journalists were here in the U.S. were forced to register as diplomats. They're considered representatives of the government, which is just insane. I mean, I worked for RT America. I didn't have any connections with the Russian government, and it's like there has to be a differentiation between a state-funded journalist and a diplomat. And Heather Nauer, the former State Department spokesperson, I remember one time she was asked a question by an RT journalist at a briefing, and she said, "Oh, you from the Russian government." And it's like, that's a journalist. That's an American journalist. That's not a diplomat. And I'd got to think that a State Department official knows the difference between a journalist and a diplomat. But it's just shocking how banal, it's become here.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, I'm gonna. There's a few things I missed out that I wanted to talk about the Hong Kong protests also. So we're gonna jump back, and then I've got a few more things that I'd like to cover on that topic. But one of the things that we really connected on in terms of tweets was after you did your video, I retweeted you and I added a lot of context in terms of additional things I noticed. But the other thing that I did was when there was a district councillor who was commenting on your thread and who was really triggered by you, especially because you called out Jimmy Lai, who funds his party. I posted some context about who this district councillor was, and I showed screenshots of his unbelievable hatred towards mainlanders. Even though within his district that he's responsible for, that he's been elected for, he has mainlanders that live under him, but just the despicable things he was saying. And you said, wow, is this what this guy is about? But could you imagine a politician in America or anywhere else getting away with the kind of stuff that these district councillors were saying about mainlanders?
It's pretty remarkable. I mean, it just reminds me of, actually where I'm from. Like, I'm from Arizona, which is a very right-wing state, generally speaking. And it's known for some of the small-time politicians saying really crazy things. The stuff about, for example, Obama was born, was not born in the U.S., that whole birther conspiracy. Oh man, I wish I could think of some of the really outlandish things they've said.
I remember that time.
Oh yeah, that was huge. Even Trump went with that. But basically you see these really extreme comments, sometimes about Jews too, about this, that, the next thing. Really, really psychotic conspiracy theories.
From elected officials too, though?
Yeah, from elected officials. Okay. But it's these are nut jobs that, and so, we do have kind of a corollary here, right. Unsurprisingly, which, probably there's something to be said for why the ones in Hong Kong that are so outlandish that they're very close with the United States, where we have them too.
Well, yeah, actually, that ties into another point I want to mention, because I want to get your opinion on the whole Jimmy Lai thing. So for people who don't know, he's kind of a media tycoon in Hong Kong here. And he has been for years stirring up conflict between locals and mainlanders, publishing things calling mainlanders locusts and really despicable things that you wouldn't imagine would be allowed in newspapers anywhere else. Now, in your video, you talk about Jimmy Lai. If I remember correctly, you don't go as far as saying what he is doing is a specific, U.S. operation, but you can't help but think. And, it makes me think also, of my mother's country, Guyana. Because there are documents now that are declassified about Guyana that shows that when Chetty Jagan, the first prime minister, was elected, and they were just about to move to independence, he was a little bit too friendly with the Soviet, and the U.S. didn't want another Cuba situation. So what they did was they went in and they created a racial war between the two ethnic groups there, the blacks and the Indians. And it got really, really bad. And then they used it as an excuse to suspend parliament and then send somebody else in who magically wasn't really a pro-Soviet anymore. The fallout from that still lasted many decades later in terms of this animosity between these two groups. And of course, there probably was some underlying tension to begin with, just like there was in Hong Kong. But this is not a theory in Guyana. Those CIA documents are already declassified. And I can't help but think, when you look at Jimmy Lai, you look at how many of these top officials he's hanging out with and, buddy with, it just looks like they dusted off an old guidebook,
Right. Well, I think, one of the differences between the kind of, decades past of CIA activity, not that the CIA is not involved in regime change plots all over the place. And I think it's a pretty safe bet that the CIA was involved in Hong Kong. And especially, what's his name? Mark Simon, Jimmy Lai's right-hand man, he interned with the CIA. He's a former, naval intelligence officer. But, basically in the 80s, after the CIA had been involved, basically armed death squads in Central America, Latin America, kind of all over the world, had really sullied its reputation. There was a shift in strategy from doing it kind of under the table to basically doing it above board. So they created what's called the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a much more, benign sounding name. And so
sounds so pleasant.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's basically one of the main regime change arms of the U.S. And according, to the founder of the National Endowment for Democracy, Alan Weinstein, he says we just, do what the CIA used to do, but we just do it kind of in the open now. And so it's like when you can go on the National Endowment for Democracy's website and look at all the money they pour into these, Hong Kong groups, and not only Hong Kong, but all over the world. The pro-democracy, I want to make these air quotes very visible, pro-democracy groups all over the world. And so it essentially serves the same function, but instead of, being in, like dark alleys or whatever, then it's now just considered like democracy promotion. But that's not to say that the CIA is not, itself is not involved. The CIA is still extremely active, and I would say more powerful than ever, especially in internal U.S. politics, which is another story. But I think it's fair to say that the Hong Kong stuff is a U.S. plot in the sense that the U.S. was very much involved. And a lot of the money came from the U.S. and Jimmy Lai was obviously coordinating what he did with the U.S. I mean, he came here to Washington and met, with Mike Pence. I mean, it's all out in the open. And so it's like, there may be some conspiracy we don't know about, and I don't doubt it. But, we don't even have to look for some secret conspiracy. It's just out in the open.
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, there was that one guy, the director of Asian, I can't remember exactly the title, from Washington, D.C. He was on one of the Fox programs saying, absolutely, we're pouring money into Hong Kong.
Exactly.
We spent millions and millions of dollars on this. If you look on the annual returns of some of the university legal departments, they're NED, they get money from the NED. And
exactly.
And then just to go that deep, where it just, like I said earlier, Joshua Wong heading to the U.S. to sit down and testify in front of Congress. Then the equal ridiculousness of people like Senator Josh Hawley coming over to Hong Kong to support the protesters and call police brutality, even though you look at his record in terms of when the protests were in his own state of Missouri, he had strong words for them and said that they would be prosecuted and fully by the law. And you look at how many months this has been going on in Hong Kong, how many people have been injured, how many shops have been burned down, and the police still haven't killed anybody. There's conspiracy out there, but if you look at how much worse it would have been anywhere else, it's amazing that people aren't seeing this and putting two and two together. I've gone a little bit off topic there with that, but it's just, the whole thing is just pretty infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, I do think police have a responsibility. I mean, in the U.S., there's a very strong anti-police sentiment on the left, which I frankly agree with. considering what, I'm not reflexively anti-police, but, it's like, look, if someone's going to rob my house, I would like for the police to come and, protect me. But considering how the police often operate in this country, where they're just a tool of the elite, where, a corporation can get away with murder, but, a guy like Eric Garner and who was selling, single cigarettes on the street got choked to death by police, and cop got off and nothing happened. So I think, when you look at how Hong Kong police acted, they were, maybe, there's an incident here or there of some frustration or whatever it is. Yeah. But by and large, they were extremely professional and responsible. And, I think frankly, they should be commended. But, when I look at like Joshua Wong is so interesting because he was in Italy a few months ago, right? Mm-hmm. Or actually, he didn't go to Italy, but he had like a Skype session with the Italian parliament. And he was tweeting, don't fall under the Chinese spell, saying this to the Italians and just doing everything possible to disrupt the Chinese-Italian relationship. Because Italy joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and had, that actually caused Joshua Wong, Skyping with the Italian parliament actually caused some minor diplomatic incident between Italy and China. And, when I look now, had that kind of, become something really serious, like really ruptured that relationship, Italy is in bad shape right now. And China is first and foremost helping Italy with its COVID-19 crisis. And so if that relationship were not there, how much worse shape would Italy be in? Not only, economically, I don't know, but in terms of, getting that help, getting the training, getting people to quarantine properly, this kind of thing to kind of stop the hemorrhaging. So I think it really says a lot about, not only like Joshua Wong's goals, but also kind of, his masters, Marco Rubio and these guys in the U.S.
Yeah. It's remarkable how so many people think of this guy as a hero when you just have to go look through his tweets. You just have to go look through his tweets. We had a guy that was burned to death, or not burned to death, but he was burned very severely in Hong Kong. He was lit on fire. And he was on his Twitter glorifying people who use Molotov cocktails as fire magicians, is what he called them.
I remember.
And with this article, talking about basically glorifying them as these superheroes. It's like, really? And people, I don't get it.
Yeah, no, it's so shameless. It's like, where are the moderates? Where are the moderate Hong Kong protesters? That, like, I have no doubt that there. Actually, I talk about it in my video, in my article. There are legitimate things to complain about, inequality, these kinds of things. But it's like taking it out on working class people who are just trying to get by their daily lives is just the exact opposite of how to properly address it.
Well, and the other thing, the other thing too is people are using this freedom expression or democracy without actually thinking about what it means. When you look at the Freedom House that says 70% of democracies around the world lack basic freedoms. When you look at the Cato Institute's report on the Human Freedom Index, Hong Kong is number 3 and America is number 17, and they're coming to save Hong Kong. And that's that report, the Cato Institute report. It's not a pro Beijing report. It's like 100-page document. They spend 3 days, 3 pages bashing China. And but the thing is they use hard math, measurable freedoms in terms of incarceration rates, size of government, healthcare, taxation, all this stuff. And Hong Kong is one of the freest places on earth. And so it's like when you sit down in a conversation with these guys, and I've had people who came over from my brew pub from Hong Kong who are, for the protesters, they're pro-protesters. I want to ask them, I said, what is it? What do you mean by freedom? And I don't really get a good answer. Sometimes they talk about budget concerns, about some money going towards the Zhuhai Bridge, the Zhuhai Macau Bridge, and all this stuff. I'm like, give me something a little bit more substantial. If all of a sudden you could, vote for your own chief executive, what is the first thing about society in Hong Kong that you would change? What is it that's not there for you right now? There's people who talk about housing issues in terms of land prices and all this stuff. But when you look at that, these are issues that are out in front of the LegCo. These are issues that a lot of the Democratic Party members vote against in terms of opening up land for more projects. And you don't really get anything substantial. And I take an open-minded approach to it. I have a lot of friends who are protesters, who do protest, and I'm fascinated about their point of view, but it just doesn't seem to add up.
Right. Well, it's like, if you're going to protest, why do you want the U.S. model? I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, the how the U.S. has just completely botched the response to coronavirus shows, I mean, to me, it totally discredits the system over here. And it's not just a matter of, Trump did a bad job. I mean, it's totally systemic. And so it's like, is this what Hong Kong wants to emulate? Where it's like everything, all the institutions have been totally gutted out. And it's just basically a playground for billionaires, where working people, or it's just like work until you die. And if you have nothing to fall back on, if something happens where the economy gets shut down, for a week, then you can't feed your family, this kind of thing. I mean, this is, I hate to say this, because I do love, my country. I do love where I'm from, and I love the people here, and
absolutely, yeah.
But it's like the system here has been totally discredited, and the same people, that Marco Rubio and all, Marco Rubio is, just a political figure, but the billionaire ruling class that is destroying, the U.S., that's just, pulling the rug out from everyone, is the same ruling class that hates China. And it's not because, it's not for the same reasons that protesters in Hong Kong hate China. It's because they want, China to be weak and isolated, and they just want to be able to dominate the world. That's it. They don't care about democracy or, housing prices or, land or this or that. I mean, they just want to be able to take wealth. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, that was made pretty apparent by the Iraqi situation, right? With the parliament, the voted in parliament, which is exactly what the U.S. wanted, is to bring democracy and freedom to the people. When they voted that they wanted the U.S. soldiers to leave, it was like, there's some conditions attached there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, all right. Well, now we see, and no, it was pretty remarkable. But what I want to say is, because I think that's important, is to note that you're talking about how the system is broken in the U.S. It doesn't mean you don't love the U.S. I mean, and on the contrary, by speaking out against this stuff, saying what's wrong with our foreign policy, what's wrong with our country, and pointing out the irony and the hypocrisy of what's going on, actually could result in improving your country. But what I'm wondering is, especially when you speak out about this Hong Kong stuff, and when I'm thinking about what happened to LeBron James when he spoke out about no, he didn't even speak out. He didn't even have an opinion. He said, I think we don't know enough. And he was just blasted for having the wrong opinion. And so I can only imagine for you to taking it one step further. It's worth mentioning what he said. Maybe we're not informed well enough in Hong Kong is not only true, it's a massive understatement. But now we've got somebody like you who takes it one step forward and says, no, I have an opinion, and we are absolutely wrong about how we're looking at it. How much hate do you receive for doing that?
I got a fair amount of hate, definitely, for that. But I mean, at this point, that's kind of my barometer of success. If I'm getting hate, I'm trying to get it from the right people. It's like, my point as a journalist, with these issues, I want to take things on that others are too afraid to, or they can't, or whatever it is. And so if I'm getting hate from the worst people, then I know I'm doing a good job. And so I definitely got a fair amount. I got some real obsessives. And, the funny thing is, most of the obsessives that I got were Western, Americans or Canadians who are in Hong Kong. It was actually not that many, Hong Kong people from Hong Kong or Chinese people in general. It was It was almost all Westerners.
Oh yeah, the really extreme one is that Hong Kong hermit guy.
Oh yeah,
He
yeah.
is he is something else. Like, I mean, he posts these things where there was one guy, there was a journalist who was hit by a Molotov cocktail, and he basically apologized on behalf of the protesters, saying, we're not always going to get this right. So basically what he's saying is they do want to light people on fire, and they apologized for lighting the wrong person on fire. He did the same thing with when they burned down Shanghai Bank or Bank of Shanghai or something like that. The protesters burnt it down, and then they realized that actually it's got nothing to do with the mainland. It's completely a Hong Kong company. Same thing. He came out and said, you know what? The important thing for us to be bigger people is to come out and say when we got it wrong, and we got this wrong, I'm sorry. So again, he's saying, yes, we are going to be burning down banks that are involved with it. It's like, and this guy's he's a school teacher. He teaches children. That's his main job. And I'm just thinking, like, these kids growing up with a guy with this kind of a messed up mind. It's scary.
Right. Yeah. Hong Kong hermit. He looks like he kind of like he like belongs at a cabana bar in like some like Caribbean island, like, ogling the waitress, but somehow he ended up in Hong Kong.
Yeah. It's
and
funny
he like
you should say that.
I don't know. He was really obsessive and aggressive, and I mean, I saw one video of him where he was trying to his whole job, it seems like to me, is to try to give like left-wing cover to this obviously like right-wing, xenophobic, violent whole mob thing. And so like there was one video I saw of him where he is trying to confront these like hard right-wing figures from the US.
I saw that.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so hilarious.
Yeah.
And he's trying to say like, no, don't talk to them. Don't talk to them. And he's trying to tell the crowd, don't talk to them. And then these right-wing Americans are like, yeah, we support freedom for Hong Kong. Yeah. And everyone's like, yeah, thank you. We're with you. And then they just like pretty much told him to shut up and go away. And he had no choice.
I posted that and I said, it's like, you've got an American guy waving an American flag in the street, arguing with a British guy in the streets of Hong Kong, arguing about what's best for Hong Kong. It's like a Monty Python skit or something like that. It was just like out of this world, And he doesn't have a consistent, so when this was happening and the economy was suffering in Hong Kong, he posted something about, we don't care about the economy, we care about freedom, or something like that this is the most important thing. And when you look back at his tweets, back when Beijing barred a U.S. Navy ship from docking in Hong Kong like they usually do, he took offense at that. And he says, what about our economy? These people will spend so much money in the bars and stuff like that. Maybe the bars should sue the Hong Kong government. It's like, what's going on?
No
here?
Consistency.
No, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
You mentioned LeBron James. I mean, that was one of the most fascinating. That was a really fascinating.
For me too.
Yeah. I mean, obviously LeBron, one of the greatest athletes in the world and just a global icon. And I mean, just like superhuman basketball player. And, he's not really a very outspoken political guy. I mean, he's made his statements a few times around Black Lives Matter in like 2015, I think, 2014, 2015. But, I mean, he said a very, I think, reasonable statement that didn't really take any kind of side, but like, we don't really know much about this and we should maybe learn more. And he got attacked so much in the U.S.
Yeah.
And it's like people, for one thing, there's like people on one hand in the U.S. want athletes to entertain them. And, they always say, like, when they make political statements, they say, shut up and dribble.
That's exactly what one of his teammates said, right? Yeah, I saw that video.
Yeah, Andre Iguodala, who's a great player and a super sharp guy. Yeah. And then it's like, but you have to speak up on Hong Kong. You better speak up on this. And it's like, you better have the right opinions. And it's so obviously racist to me.
It was a witch hunt. It was a witch hunt through the NBA. And I couldn't help but think, like, it's like McCarthyism all over again. The Red Scare.
Totally.
Where, it's like not only are we going to hunt you down and you have to speak up, you better have the correct opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like when if they were like, oh, China is censoring American free speech, which is like the most asinine argument I've ever heard, as if like China is not forcing LeBron James or anyone to be quiet. It's just that's what LeBron chose to say. And so that whole argument is so weird to me, because it's basically like it's what the far right says. It's like here, like when the far right in the US says something like racist, and then there's pushback against it, they'll, which is basically free speech versus free speech. Then they'll say, "Oh, you're censoring me. You're censoring me. You can't censor me. That's like some authoritarian, totalitarian thing." And it's like, no, you can't, like, that's just someone else exercising their free speech. And so that's like what a lot of liberals in the US did too with LeBron James. They were like, "Oh, China is censoring us and censoring LeBron James and all this stuff." And it's adopted this like far right kind of talking point that they understand correctly. They understand that it's not actually censorship when it comes to like domestic politics, but when it comes to like China, liberals become like right-wing Cold Warriors too.
It's really weird. It is really weird. It's surprising that people just couldn't see through this witch hunt, this hysteria, especially because we've got history as a reference. People can, but it seems like we're never doing that. Whether it be the Iraqi WMD thing, like we know that we're being lied to, but we never do anything with it. I did see, though, there was a really interesting tweet that was both sad and encouraging at the same time. There was a girl who tweeted, and she said something along the lines of, "I'm 19 years old, I've finished high school, and I never learned about the Iraq War," which is just like not too long ago. She had to learn about it from her friend. And so that's sad, but it's encouraging that she came to the realization that this is a problem. And it was encouraging to see how many people liked it and retweeted it. And I actually asked her a question because I found that she was really introspective. And I've had this question for quite a while. I didn't get an answer because her tweet is just blown up. She's probably getting a lot of comments under it. But what I wanted to ask was if she knows about both the Tiananmen Square incident and the Kent State shootings, where police opened up fire on the students, which is coming up to, I think it's its 50-year anniversary coming up. If she knows about both of them, which did she learn about first? And so I didn't get an answer about that. So I wonder what it was for you, or what you think the answer probably would be. Like, do most people in America know about Tiananmen Square while not knowing anything about the Kent State shootings, or do they learn about them at different times? What's your kind of thought on that?
Definitely. Well, for myself, I learned about Kent State first for whatever reason, just because I don't know, my family's not even really political, but my parents are kind of that generation to a degree. Okay. And so, also there's a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song. The name of it, I've totally forgotten, but it's about Kent State. And I grew up, my parents raised me listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, but it's about 4 dead in Ohio. And so, it's about the National Guard opening fire on these student protesters who were, protesting the Vietnam War. But I mean, most people, they have no idea what Kent State is. And they definitely know about Tiananmen Square. That's like burned into American consciousness.
And they cut, even though if you look at the original, I think it was CBS footage of the guy, standing in front of the tank and stuff like that. And the tank just refuses to move forward. And he keeps trying to move, and the tank keeps trying to dodge him. And eventually the tank just stops. He even climbs up on top of it. Then his friends get him and say, "Okay, no, let's go." And then he goes off into the crowd. People have cut that, right? Where you just have to fill in the end with your imagination and imagine that he was run over.
Right.
And then the same thing is, they probably don't know about the war vets, where the tanks came in and tried to run over them and ran over all of their structures. There was that in U.S. history, and that one I've asked a lot of people. Not many people know about that one.
I don't think I know about that, actually.
Yeah, I'll have to share. No, maybe I'll put it in the video link. There was they were I have to look.
There are so many horrible incidents in the history of the US that it's like, even domestically, that it's like, I'm not saying it's impossible to keep track of all these, but it's like, it takes work. Definitely. It's not like there's like a couple of seminal moments. It's like, man, there is so much. I think there was maybe like, I don't know. I don't want to get into speculation. There's You just have to like look on YouTube for the hundreds of like police shootings of unarmed people. That it's horrifying. Snuff videos, all the time. And I can't imagine living outside of the U.S. how it must look to like. It's like I live here, so it's like kind of like normalized for me in a way. But it's like if I lived in like China or I don't know somewhere, I would just be like, what an insane country the U.S. is.
You know what? You know what? Actually, you'd be surprised how much of a positive view Chinese people have about the U.S. They, of course, from a political standpoint, they really dislike the U.S. For this period of time, but they think it's a beautiful country. They think it's an amazing country, and they'd like to visit it because they don't have the same kind of stuff here where they're villainizing the U.S.
Right.
in the same kind of way, including its people.
Right.
Where you see on Twitter, you see, for example, during the original parts of the virus, if you look on Twitter, there was a person here who put their spit on the elevator buttons here, in one of the buildings, and somebody reposted it to say this is China, and but
Right.
you don't see people in China doing the same thing when the Amazon delivery guy spit on the package. You don't see people doing that here saying this is America. You might get one or two people who are bigoted or something like that, but you'd be surprised how much China censors if it's insulting not only towards their own people, but to other people. There's a guy on YouTube who does a lot of really good analysis, a lot of videos on China. And also he did one blasting the New York Times for its really unfair coverage about China. And when he posted it on Chinese social media removed it because it was too inflammatory towards the New York Times. It's like,
amazing.
Yeah, seriously. So you don't get the same kind of thing, but then it creates the situation. So my wife is Chinese, and the first time I took her to the U.S., we drove I'm from Toronto. We drove across and we went through Buffalo, and there's some pretty rough neighborhoods in Buffalo, boarded up homes and stuff like that. And she's like, we're in America? This is America? And so if anything, they have a better image of America than many of the
right.
They don't know as much about the issues.
How much of that do you think has to do with Hollywood and basically, I think Hollywood serves a role as kind of it's cultural imperialism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in Canada, we grow up with, all of the superheroes are American
Exactly.
superheroes for the most part. And of course, that's going to have an effect. To tell you about the article I was talking about, so it was when Patton rolled tanks over veterans in Washington, D.C.
Right. Yes.
And it was 1932, 17,000 former soldiers marched to Washington, D.C. And then the tanks just rolled down the streets. Apparently, there were people who died, but I think they were rolling over most of their kind of structures that they had built to camp out there and stuff like that. And so, I mean, even you had to think twice about that.
Right.
Tanks,
it rang the bell
right away.
Right.
These tanks.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And Patton is considered like a hero in the U.S., like the World War II like greatest general. I mean, he's in like the pantheon of American heroes. I saw somebody on Twitter today who had some viral tweet about like we need a General Patton of the coronavirus pandemic. So, I mean, all that stuff is just totally erased from consciousness.
Yeah. Getting back to some of the hate that you get, I'm interested in talking about that a little bit more because I get a lot with my position as well, and I understand the value of using the block button for some people, so I don't judge people who do, but I never did. I pretty much let everybody comment for people to see what kinds of opinions there are out there. On my YouTube videos, I even actually super like and pin some of the comments that are critical of my position, but they're very few and far between. So what I want to know is what have you seen with what you're doing? Do you see valid criticisms, or just more is it towards the side of just being offended that you challenge the narrative rather than actually disputing particular facts?
Yeah, pretty much all of it. I mean, I would like valid criticisms because it's like this is, I don't claim to be an expert on Hong Kong or China by any stretch. And it's like if there are weaknesses in what I'm saying or my article or any of that stuff, I really want to know.
Right.
But I mean, pretty much everything I got was just vicious hatred where, so it doesn't really faze me when I get that. It means it's like, it kind of just like, okay, great. It tells me that I'm probably on the right track if I'm pissing off the right people, like I said. And also like I've had that same experience with, reporting on other issues like Syria, Venezuela, Israel, Palestine, that kind of thing. And so it's like, I know that there's basically gangs of like trolls and people who are kind of police the narrative online that, if you break from the narrative at all, if you kind of offer a counter narrative, then you're just going to be viciously attacked.
Yeah, that's really amazing, isn't it? That you have a population of people who think they are free, who are acting as voluntary soldiers for U.S. propaganda. That where if they identify somebody who's even speaking up against or has a different idea, they are on you and they're attacking you. And it's like, you're free, but you're completely mindlessly acting as a voluntary, soldier for this effort.
Exactly. And the goal is to get you to self-censor, where it's like, oh, it's too much. I don't want to deal with the harassment, the online harassment. So it's like, I'm not even going to bother with it. And it makes, it is unfortunate because it makes Twitter, and Twitter especially, a very, very negative place where I've had, basically what are clearly, counterintelligence operations where people have, shady figures that have pretty clear connections to intelligence agencies have, like U.S. intelligence or British, have dug up into my personal life and lied about, details of my personal life that it's like, how could they,
yeah, those ones are really interesting. I saw somebody who called one of them out. Well, aside from there was one Uyghur activist who was going to do an AMA on Reddit about Uyghurs in so-called internment camps and all this stuff. And before the AMA, somebody revealed that she actually really legitimately worked for the CIA and she was involved in Guantanamo Bay.
Oh yeah.
And so
Ruslan Abbas, I think is her name.
Yeah, that's it. And the AMA just was loaded with questions like, what was it like, working with Guantanamo Bay? Do you see the irony here about torturing people there while talking about, And I don't think she actually went through with the AMA in the end because of it. It was just hilarious. But then you get the people on Twitter, the same kind of thing, and they are sponsored by groups that lead back to arms manufacturers. And so somebody pointed out the irony of it, saying that here you have a human rights activist calling me a tanky while working for a company that actually manufactures tanks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're the real tankies. Exactly. It's like they're accusing us, like anti-war people, of being like pro-war, and it's like, come on, you people are like the most aggressive, like war-loving fanatics around.
It's unbelievable. But so do you find when you're doing this and you get all this hate, because it takes, like you said, it's unfortunate because it does prevent speech, because it does become too much for some people. You need a certain thickness of skin. You need a certain personality to deal with it. But do you ever find yourself catching yourself and having to readjust yourself to really keep your mood in check? And I'll give you an example from me. So for example, with YouTube, I was getting all of these kind of common. The thing that bothers me most is not somebody disagreeing with me. It's having a super ignorant comment that just the logic is so flawed and people can't understand why, what's wrong with it. And I started addressing them and I started talking about them. And slowly I was speaking more to my detractors than my supporters, or the people who are in the middle ground who maybe I can convince to look at things in a different way. And I was reminded by some of my followers, they said, hey, Daniel, why are you doing this? Why are you speaking to these people? You're not going to get through to them. And we're here to listen. Can you be a little bit more, And it readjusted me. I'm like, okay, yeah, you know what? I think I need to readjust my attitude. Did you ever find your attitude going in a direction where you didn't want it to go and have to kind of reset yourself also?
Yeah, to a degree. It's easy to get, reactionary or aggressive or whatever, but I think I kind of just see, these people as opportunities. It's like when someone is reacting that strongly to me making a reasonable argument, it's like it shows that my argument is stronger and they can't actually challenge it on any logical grounds. And so the only thing they can do is try to defame you and slander you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and attack your character. And so it's like, when I'm in my higher level thinking, I'm like more responsible. I'm like, all right, this is an opportunity to advance my argument, to show my followers, people who are looking to me to understand this issue, this is the counter argument is like, this is what the opposition has to offer.
Yeah, that is a very valuable point of it. When you're making future content, you can already imagine what some of the detractors will say, and you can come up and you can test your own argument by giving yourself a counter argument while you're delivering whatever it is you're saying. So there is value, and obviously we can't respond to all of those people individually, even though how much you'd like to say, that's flawed because of this. But eventually you have to get to a point where you're in the right mindset. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to approach it. I'm not going to get upset by these. I'm going to leave them there. It really is quite an experience doing this.
Definitely. And it's important to not get too deep into it and be based in reality too, because it's easy for people to spend too much time on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. I had a talk with somebody a couple days ago named Kim Iverson, and she quit Twitter, but that was before her kind of isolation thing that she's doing now, because she says it's just too negative and it makes her a worse person. But now she's back on Twitter because she's at home. She's got a lot of extra time.
Yeah.
but it really is. Twitter's a special place in that regard in terms of bringing out kind of the lowest of the low.
It is. I mean, Twitter's a funny thing because it's like on one hand, it can be just a real cesspool for negativity, but it's also kind of a battleground for the intelligentsia in a way, where it's like, you can interact with all kinds of prominent people who you just never have the chance to otherwise. And you can, meet. I mean, that's how, you and I know each other, and you can meet really great people. I mean, I've met, through my Hong Kong stuff, most of the I got a lot of hate from a few people who were just kind of obsessed with attacking me. And so that was like, not pleasant, whatever. But I met some really great people through that who, I mean, when I look back at, that kind of couple months where I was like very focused on Hong Kong, it was an overwhelmingly positive experience because of the really good people that I met and the learning experience that I had. So I think, it's about using it in the right way. And, if you kind of take it to heart too much, then it can be overwhelming and bleed into your personal life. But
yeah. That's important to note. There is through all of that garbage on there's a lot of value if you can find, you follow the right people, and not necessarily people that agree with you. I follow a bunch of people who are completely against my opinion, and some of them even a couple of, obviously I can't communicate with all of them, but a couple of them who have pretty strong arguments. I've built a personal relationship with them, and we chat through private chat, and they're regularly sending me articles. They're completely biased, and they're always sending me the worst of the worst to try to prove their point. But it's a very valuable exchange for I don't know whether it's valuable for them. Maybe I'll never ever change their mind, but I take value from it, seeing, okay, this is what people are thinking. This is what how they react to it, or even sometimes adjusting my own opinion. Sometimes it will adjust my opinion, saying, okay, all right, maybe I missed the mark on that one, and they have a point sometimes. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it would have been easy for me to say, it's like, okay, Hong Kong is just a U.S. plot, and there's no background, there's no anything, but obviously there's more to it. Not that my detractors told me that, but it's like, people could definitely tell me that, and that would be valuable.
Yeah. So one thing I've always been kind of curious about, and I know you're connected now with Max Blumenthal, who's an amazingly talented guy who did a really great mini documentary on the NED, and with Radio Free, talking about Radio Free Asia and the misinformation campaign from the U.S. And it was really shocking to see when he was arrested in Washington D.C., by a SWAT team, and on the arrest warrant it said armed and dangerous, even though he's never owned a gun in his life. And to me, it almost seemed like it was a message to journalists who are uncovering things like he is, and obviously Julian Assange would be the ultimate example of that. Do you ever wonder? Do you ever think that maybe there's a chance where you're eventually going to cross a line where you will be a little bit of a target, whether they'll go as far as doing what they did to Max and arresting you to intimidate you? Do you ever think about that, or do you think you're not at risk of that?
I think it's like, if there are certain things that if I went after, then definitely could become a target, and that possibility does exist. Not to say that I'm like some. I mean, Max is a much more prominent an accomplished journalist than I am. And he's kind of a lightning rod for controversy, and has been for pretty much as long as he's been in journalism, and now more than ever, because he's gone from kind of domestic politics to Israel-Palestine was his thing for some years, and he made a lot of people angry with that. And now, he's very focused on like geopolitics. And so, he's more of a lightning rod than he's ever been. But, which is really his sign of success. I see it as. For myself, I mean, I don't feel like I'm under any kind of threat. I think it's mostly like, if anything, it's more, like I said, those, counterintelligence operations where it's trying to create smears about me. There was one that I like abused an ex-girlfriend because she didn't support Assad, and like crazy things like that, which are like kind of funny, but
at
also
least come up with something more believable. Like,
yeah, exactly. But I don't know. I mean, if I hope not, but who knows where this country is going. And I certainly can't live in a state of fear. And if things get really hot here, maybe I'll have to escape to like China or Venezuela or something.
That would be ironic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, before I wrap this up, one other thing I just thought of as you were talking about this was, we've seen not everybody's seen. A lot of people have seen videos of, Pompeo up on stage talking about what he did as a CIA director. The whole thing was they lied, they cheat, they steal, and they had entire training manuals on this. And perhaps even more shocking than him saying that, seeing the audience cheer him for it. I think I believe it was in Texas that talk was.
Yeah.
And so it makes me think, and it makes me wonder, how many people in the US, how many ordinary citizens or the masses, how many of them really truly believe that U.S. foreign policy is a force for good in the world? And how many of them know, deep down inside, they know that it's absolutely sinister, but they're just okay with it because of the benefits to their own country or whatever it may be? What would you say that balance is? Are most people really fooled, or they're deliberately complacent?
I think a lot of people think that the U.S. is generally a force for good, but at the same time, they are skeptical about getting involved in more wars. And they know that those haven't, really worked out. They know that everyone knows that Iraq was a lie, that, Iraqi WMDs were a lie. Not everyone knows that, the Syria chemical weapons, attack and the scandal that's engulfing the OPCW that, Piers Robinson has done a lot of really good work with. And, you can read a lot about that at Gray Zone Project. Aaron Mate has covered it. I did a lot. I've done some videos about that. So I think people are very skeptical of war, and a lot of it is because the situation in the U.S. is really bad, and they just don't see, why should we go to war with another country, even if they don't see that the U.S. is necessarily like this, global empire that just wants to rob other countries' wealth and dominate in every corner. I think when you look at Syria, there was a huge, massive propaganda effort to convince Americans that we need to, overthrow the Assad government. And the U.S. tried really hard, the Obama administration and then Trump tried really hard, poured huge amounts of money and weapons into Syria in an effort to do that. And at the same time, pumped out an enormous amount of very sophisticated propaganda, more sophisticated than I've actually ever seen. I did a video that kind of debunks some of it. It's called the Syria Deception that you can watch on YouTube. Okay. It's called the Syria Deception. Al-Qaeda Goes to Hollywood.
Okay. Is it on your own channel? Is it on your?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll link it in the description.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And so it kind of shows some of the deceptions that were all throughout mainstream media, Netflix, and all over the place. So there's just so much effort that goes into convincing Americans to go to war. I think because there's skepticism now. We know that the Iraq thing changed it all. I mean, we were lied to about Vietnam also, and but that was decades ago, and I think
But it
people
keeps
just
happening over and over again. So
it's true.
it sounds like the answer is most people think they're doing something good. They learn afterwards that, oh, that wasn't so good, but they're still fooled the next time around.
That's often the case, but I think what changes and what has shifted is that the domestic situation is unstable in the U.S. and more people are suffering from like gross inequality, and so they see like why should we get involved in more wars and that kind of thing. I think
I
that's
guess
what's
it's
changing.
easier to keep people focused on elsewhere and kind of virtue signaling others when you more or less have your crap in order at home, for lack of a better word. But if you've got domestic issues mounting, then it'll be a lot harder to care about what's going on somewhere else. There was one thing that I saw that was kind of encouraging, which was when there was a missile attack, and this was before Soleimani was assassinated. It was a missile attack on. It was either a ship or on the oil fields, or whatever it was. But I did see somebody post when they were trying to blame Iran for this. They're like, "Yeah, right. We've seen this before," and there were actually people who were really skeptical about it. It got lots of retweets, but it didn't stop anything. The U.S. still went and they still assassinated a foreign general in a land that they've got no jurisdiction in, and people just kind of forgot about it. So I don't know if this is an issue of people just being too complacent, or the propaganda machine's just becoming so much more sophisticated, or a combination of both. But it really has been an interesting thing to observe.
I mean, I think there wasn't huge support for the Soleimani assassination. And that's despite, I mean, pretty sophisticated propaganda with that. And I mean, the majority of media on that was like was actually not totally on board with Trump's decision to assassinate. They basically said strategically, we don't have any problem with assassinating this general, from a legal or moral perspective. We have no problem with assassinating a foreign leader. What we have a problem with is just the way it was done. Is this gonna, is this gonna backfire? Is this gonna alienate our allies? This, that. How is this gonna work out? And they had, admitted that the Obama administration had considered assassinating him as well, but chose not to because they weren't sure of what would happen. And so, I mean, that's generally the criticism from kind of the establishment in the U.S. Yeah, that's generally the criticism of Trump, is that he's not, it's just that he's not a good enough operator. He's not like a qualified enough operator of the empire, because he's, he's prone to impulsive decision making. He doesn't understand the kind of orthodoxy of Washington, of, you have this grand chessboard, as Zbigniew Brzezinski called it, and it requires like a real, you have to understand the playbook of how to operate the U.S. empire. And if you're just some guy coming in and saying like, I want to do this, and he's also a businessman, so he's prone to, maybe he'll want to make a deal. Like he thought about making a deal with Kim Jong-un, but basically, everyone around him prevented that from happening. So, Trump is dangerous, but to be honest, I think everyone around him is even more dangerous.
Yeah, that's interesting. The Middle East is kind of a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I started looking into it after seeing a lot of your content and some of the other people that you work with. But it made me think also, and I'm wondering, do you think that when some of these things happen under a right-wing government, people are way more critical of it than when it happens under a left-wing government? And the reason I ask that is, even though in this particular case Obama decided against going ahead with that assassination, generally speaking, when you look at the list of things that Bush did, in terms of what other countries would most certainly call war crimes and all of these things, and then you look at what Obama did, it doesn't look much better. There's a lot of shocking stuff in there as well. But everybody kind of looks back. They would, I think people generally have a way more critical view um, uh, of Bush, and maybe that's my flawed perspective as an outsider looking in. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that Hollywood seems to be, more or less, left leaning, and you've got that influence there. But is there a double standard, or within the U.S. It's more or less based on what people actually do?
No, I think it's true that there is, from the kind of liberal class in the U.S., there's generally more pushback against, right wing against Bush. So like Bush's war was very unpopular, still happened. There were mass protests, but where Obama came in and campaigned on like hope and change, and but he really continued a lot of the same policies and expanded the drone wars, use of drones and assassinations, using drones. And that became kind of a major criticism of like the Obama foreign policy, is just like this like crazy drone assassination program. But it didn't, like, one of the things that was so effective about Obama's foreign policy is that it didn't really have many people coming home in body bags. So it's like Americans, like, they get pretty excited about war at the beginning, and the president's approval rating goes really high when they declare the war. And then it's like, once it goes poorly, which always happens, and then American soldiers start dying, then it becomes like, all right, Americans are not really on board with this. And so Obama basically eliminated the American soldiers in a lot of ways by, having these kind of secret wars. There were a lot of secret wars under his term. So, I think if Trump were to, like, Trump can't really launch a ground invasion. He had talked about launching a ground invasion of Venezuela, which would have been another, kind of Iraq, Vietnam, some kind of horror show where just huge amounts of people, Venezuelans and American soldiers, would die. And, he just couldn't do it. I mean, he wanted to do it in Iran too. And it's just like, he knew it would destroy his presidency in Iran in particular, because the Fox News host Tucker Carlson, who's generally a right-wing guy, I mean, he is a right-wing guy, he convinced Trump that it would destroy his it would destroy his legacy, and there's no way he'd be reelected, and it would be, much worse than even Iraq would be. And so he kind of, convinced Trump to not go to war. I mean, he's actually emerged as a really interesting character in the Trump era, because he's, got some really weird right-wing views, but he's basically like, I see him as kind of the angel on Trump's arm, whereas, like, I mean, John Bolton's out, but like a John Bolton figure is like the devil on his shoulder, and Tucker Carlson is like the angel. And yeah, it's Tucker Carlson. Like, he says all kinds of things I disagree with culturally, he's very conservative and all this stuff, but, he's kind of like the anti-war voice in Trump's ear. He also told him to take coronavirus seriously. When Trump was calling it a hoax, Tucker Carlson flew down to Mar-a-Lago and was like, Mr. President, you have to, like, take this seriously. This is a real thing.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something. And just finishing off on the thought too, though, of accountability, of whether it's a right-wing government or a left-wing government. I still can't help, just to get back to that point too, I can't help but think that celebrities and things like that, considering Hollywood is mostly left-leaning, I'm assuming that that's the case from the outside. That's what it looks like. But they're more likely to speak up when Trump does something that they don't like, than holding somebody like Obama to task on something, because people are kind of, it seems like they are picking their sides, and they're, they go all the way with it. I started listening to, I listened to news and everything like that from both sides, and I started listening to a lot more right-wing stuff on it just before Trump came in. And there's some interesting voices out there, with Candace Owens and all of these people. Again, same kind of thing. I don't necessarily agree with everything they say, but the one thing I noticed was these people who I do consider intellectuals, regardless if I agree with them or not, it's like, they go all the way. It's like they don't, like, they even they're on board with even the most ridiculous things. People just pick their sides.
Right.
And they kind of just, yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons Bush had a lot of opposition to the war. It's because he was a Republican to the war in Iraq. But I mean, yeah, there's, it's just like partisanism. There's so much of it in the U.S. and it's really hampering any kind of like good response to the coronavirus crisis. And it's just a plague. But at the same time, they'll be like, China just has the Communist Party, and so, they're a dictatorship. But we have multiple parties. We have two parties. And so, that means we have freedom, yet, our two parties cannot hardly get anything done. And the things they do get done are all for billionaires. But when it comes to like, getting working class people anything, it's just like infighting and bickering and dysfunction, and it can't happen.
It goes back to what I say about people need, when they say that, they need to actually think about what it means. So when people, for example, say that China lacked transparency in the beginning of this coronavirus thing, and then they ramped up January 11th, they genome sequenced this, released it to the public so that everybody could start preparing for this. They locked down cities, and they took this really seriously here. And so if there was a transparency issue in the beginning, and people really think that when doctors hear something and they want to just go out to the public and say to everybody, okay, we need to all panic before it goes through the necessary processes, even if we don't want to argue about that point, and even if we want to say, okay, China lacked transparency, their lack of transparency caused a delay in the beginning, but in the end, they came through in a way so with a response so much bigger than anybody else. So at the end of the day, what would you rather have? Would you have no transparency with complete action and keeping us all safe, which obviously comes with its own issues, or would you be happily saying, we have complete transparency, but we do nothing about it?
Right.
It's like, like what are we actually
we have
here?
Well, here in the US we have little transparency and little action, so it's like the worst of both.
That is the actual truth of it. That's the actual truth of it. But even if people were to believe that concept, that we are the most transparent nation on earth, but we just don't do anything with the data,
right?
I mean, what's the use then?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable to see kind of the conflicting narratives about how China has handled coronavirus here in the U.S. I mean, the right wants to use it to escalate the Cold War and say, that it originated in China and China, didn't tell the U.S. and all this stuff and blah, blah. And it's, which is not true, that China didn't tell the U.S. That China told the U.S. on January 3rd, according to Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah.
And for about 2 months, the U.S. did nothing. You know what happened on January 3rd when China told the Center for Disease Control? That is the day that the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani. So, so that's where American priorities are. So it's like,
it's interesting seeing that it looks like there are some divides happening in the U.S. now, because I saw the weirdest thing. It was the U.S. Embassy in Ireland that in Dublin or whatever, they released a tweet saying, did you know that the CDC, the American CDC, has an office in Beijing, works closely with the government authorities, and was on the ground with authorities in Wuhan investigating this? And it's like, no additional context, but it's like, it was almost like pushing back against what the rest of the government is saying on the United States side. And it was really interesting to see. So it seems like there are divisions happening, or perhaps it's just getting so, the finger pointing is getting so ridiculous, and it's affecting the ability to taking away important attention from actually responding to it, that maybe more and more people are going to start standing out even from within the government.
Yeah, I mean, there's major divisions and splits within like the ruling class and the government, and there's, I mean, for better or worse, and I guess in some ways, for better that there's divisions, but it can go different ways. And I mean, Trump has proven to be an extremely inept leader in this time. I mean, I have my criticisms of him in general, but I mean, his handling of the coronavirus crisis has been just an F, and it's going to cost a lot of lives. But it's not only Trump. It's, I mean, there's the Cold War with China is bigger than Trump. And he's escalated the trade war, and he's started the trade war really, but he's refused to grant exemptions, on products like Purell, hand sanitizer, things like that it's like it's desperately needed. That can, prevent the spread, the transfer of the virus. But, I mean, we've seen this country's kind of institutions hollowed out for decades. It's really interesting to see Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, being hailed as some kind of hero right now, when this Republican governor has overseen hospital beds being removed, the healthcare system being gutted, and all of a sudden now he's like doing these daily briefings as if he's some kind of hero. And now that he has this crisis on his hands, I mean, what was unthinkable a month ago, 2 months ago, is now happening, where he's calling on Trump to nationalize healthcare. Where it's like that's unbelievable. I mean, people have been calling that, that's been kind of like considered extreme, like some kind of socialist position for years and years. But now it's like all of a sudden, like, governors are like, Mr. President, like, we're going to have huge amounts of dead people unless you do this. And he refuses to do it. There's actually an incredible clip of a reporter asking Trump, you have these governors asking you to nationalize, the healthcare supply system, and he says, we're not going to do that because look at Venezuela. They nationalized their healthcare, their businesses, and look how they are. And so he gives this example of a country that's been, crushed by sanctions, by U.S. sanctions, as like, the example of a failure. It's just so sadistic.
I'm looking at what's going on there, and I'm actually embarrassed by one of my comments in one of my previous videos, because before anybody was really taking action and we were waiting for governments to take action, I said in one of my videos, if you compare Canada to the US, I said I would rather have somebody like Trump leading the nation than Justin Trudeau, because Justin Trudeau can be a little bit flaky and a little bit, I didn't think he would be capable of handling something like this. When you look at Trump saying, okay, if the shit really hits the fan and he's really got to do something, he can take the bull by the horns and do what he's got to do. But we didn't see that. We didn't see him doing that. We see all of a sudden economic priorities or whatever else going on, and it's just a complete mess. Whereas Justin Trudeau, he did what I thought he'd never do. He came out and said, guys, stay home. If you're not listening, we will use the law. We will use our police force to enforce this. And he took it really, really seriously. And it completely undid my assumption of who would be a better leader during a time like this. But it's scary, though. I mean, there's so many people. I'm seeing videos online of people who are out of work now. They're afraid about medical bills and all this stuff. And I just can't help but feel really, really sad for them. And imagine how worrying it is for so many people in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really scary. And, it's basically like, this is like the 2009, 2008, 2009 economic crisis, where basically that resulted in, huge amounts of unemployment, poverty, homelessness, people losing their homes, and just a massive wealth transfer to the rich, to the ultra wealthy. I mean, I don't mean rich like, you make $100,000 or $200,000. I'm talking about like the ultra wealthy billionaires. And, the country actually never recovered from that. Here in the U.S., we never recovered from that. And now that's basically the same thing that's happening. The Trump just signed a $4.5 billion bailout, they call it, which is just another wealth transfer to corporations with no strings attached. And average people are going to get, working class people who make under $100,000, $99,000, are going to get a one-time payment of $1,200, which, here I live in DC, Washington, DC. That's good for half a month of rent. And so it's like, that's nothing.
Well, not only that, there was a report also that said the $1,200 that everybody's going to get almost perfectly matches up with the additional $1,200 in expenses people will have from all of these tariffs from the trade war.
I didn't see that. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, because it's like as much as Trump wants to say it's the other countries that will pay. No, it's the American consumers that will pay.
Yeah.
It's like the Mexico will pay for the wall thing all over again.
Right.
So all that's happened is that they've received relief for the trade war, and now they're back at zero. Now they're even again. But yeah, it's really messed up the priorities and the way that things are happening.
I just hope there's some silver lining in this. I mean, geopolitically, I do think there's a silver lining in that, the kind of U.S. paradigm of just total domination is being discredited. The EU is there's major divisions in the EU now. And China is basically filling those gaps. And, there's a lot of American politicians who think that it's some nefarious plot by China. But it's basically China just offering solidarity and saying well, we can, we're happy to give you masks and, this, that, medical supplies and help to combat this. And it's it's easy to say, if you have all your resources that, this is some Chinese plot and there's an ulterior motive. But it's if you're dying, if your people are dying and someone offers you if you're in the desert and you're dying of thirst and someone offers you a drink, I don't care where they're from. I'm going to take that drink.
It doesn't matter anymore. And it has been fascinating to see when China. So I know one of the frontline doctors in Wuhan also, and I was sharing some pictures with him of the nurses and doctors in the U.S. who are just same kinds of things as before, like sleeping on the ground, leaning up against the wall, just exhausted. It absolutely breaks your heart to see it, just like it broke my heart when I saw Chinese doctors going through the same thing. And for him too, when I sent it to him, he says, this is really terrible. And he said, soon we're probably going to be sent overseas to help other people. And he's looking forward to it. He's looking forward to helping other people, despite going through one of the most difficult periods in his life in Wuhan, just being worked to death, being scared for his life when he was first called from his hometown to be sent there. He's got 2 young kids and his wife was worried for him also. And he's ready to go out again to battle now, not only for his own people, but for other people. And that's why it's so infuriating to see when newspapers saying, they're trying to curry, a favor or whatever it is.
Right.
China has a long history of this. It was back when China almost had nothing. They helped with railroads in Africa. Before this, they have a military ship that travels around the world with doctors helping people long before this coronavirus situation. Nobody knows about that. Nobody's covering that ship, the medical ship that China has been sending around the world for years to help people. And all of a sudden, it's this giant agenda. And it's annoying. It's insulting, especially to the frontline doctors in Wuhan who are ready to go and help people. It's upsetting to see.
Yeah, no, it totally is. It's really disgusting to me. And, speaking for myself, I'm amazed by what, China has done, by what Cuba has done. And really, when I look at it, it's, the countries that have defended their revolutions that are under sanctions and that are the targets of the U.S. empire that are providing the most solidarity and material aid to countries that are being hit.
Cuba also, wasn't it?
Exactly. I went to Cuba over the summer, right? Actually, the day when I was supposed to be packing to go to Cuba, I was working on my Hong Kong article, cramming it. And I went to Cuba the next day and I went for my honeymoon for 2 weeks. And it was just incredible, just the most beautiful island, cultural powerhouse. The people are amazing, friendly, amazing, food is good, and it's just
Yeah, my sister had her wedding there. I went for her wedding. It's beautiful, and you see all the old cars on the street too. It's really beautiful.
And it's for such a small place, it produces so much culture and just so much good to the world. And it's under this horrible blockade for 60 years. By the world's most powerful empire that it's just 90 miles away from. And so it's just it's such an incredible success story to me. And it's what could Cuba accomplish if it wasn't under blockade? And so I'm thankful to China and to Cuba and to the countries that are actually offering real solidarity to the world and that are saving lives. Where the U.S. is still bombing Iraq while China is delivering aid and this kind of thing. And so what I hope is that the silver lining in this period is that it signals some kind of new paradigm where, the U.S. is losing its potency, which is I think a theme that we've been seeing, but that this kind of like fast forwards it in a way, and not that, I'm afraid for what's going to happen inside the U.S., that we're going to go through some kind of like, after the collapse, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, how it was in Russia for years and years and years. And I'm afraid of what it's going to be, because we have just such increasing inequality here. But, we have to look towards the future. And I just really hope that it's, we're ushering in some kind of era of international cooperation and solidarity where we can more effectively, confront problems like pandemics that we're going to face in the future.
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of so many things happening at the same time that would make that seem like it's possible. I mean, you've got the increasing, growing wealth gap, which is, according to the Gini coefficient, the highest it's been in like 50 years. You've got this pandemic, which exposes how ineffective the government is in being there for its people when they need it. And then you've got other countries which have been villainized by the world for ages, going out and helping the other countries. And then people are going to start examining this a bit more and saying, okay, you know what? I've said all along, China's going around and building these economic partnerships because of their own self-interest, and they're going to have benefit also. Yeah, this is called mutual benefit, even if that's true. They're not sending soldiers with guns. They're sending scientists, road builders, doctors. And it's like, even if they're going to benefit from having economic trade between the country, which is going to lift that country up also, and
Right.
everybody's going to benefit, what's better? What's the better option? And I think people are just scared of this idea that China's the next global superpower, when if you actually look at it, and even if you think, so one of the arguments is that, okay, so China is a fairly centralized power. And even if they want to concede with me and say that, yes, they're a force for good in the world right now, but because their power is so centralized, what if all of a sudden they turn bad? And it's like, what we can see based on facts right now, based on what they're actually doing, they would be a better global power based on what they're doing right now for other countries. And if they did happen to turn bad, maybe what we're going to end up with is what we have now, which isn't that great anyways. But at least there is a hope. At least there is a chance of something better. We can only go based on the evidence of what we can see. And I think there's enough evidence for a lot of countries to say we're ready for something a little bit more different than, especially developing nations, than what we've been living with in the world.
Yeah, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It's like we can say, everyone in Washington can say, oh, China's this dictatorship or whatever, but it's like, a lot of the world disagrees or seems to, find something enticing about that so-called dictatorship, and, where the U.S. has really discredited itself, on the international stage and domestically. So.
Yeah, I mean, from all walks of life, from the villages to the cities to everything, people are pretty supportive of their government here. You're going to find people who have issues with the government, and there's open conversations about that. I mean, I was at this RV kind of a tailgate kind of a party, and there were two guys arguing with each other. But one guy really didn't like something about the government, and the other guy did, and you have these kinds of arguments here. But overall, the overwhelming majority of people, and people can see that from the Chinese who go on the internet, use a VPN to comment on stuff. They can see it from Chinese students who go overseas and still say that they love their government and they love their country. These people, there's enough of them for people to say, maybe I'm a little bit off the mark here by trying to tell these people what's best for them. And, and stop just calling them brainwashed, because that's how they're discredited right now. They just say, oh, they're just brainwashed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's where I think it's really important for, alternative media to, and like people like you, just like doing your own YouTube show and this kind of thing to like, bridge that gap to kind of provide an alternative narrative. And so people, can kind of like, we need to burst that bubble so people can, get like a sense of reality. Cause I mean, we're just subject to so much propaganda in this country that it's really hard. I think a lot of people, when you start talking to them as, face to face, it's not that hard, but I mean, they're just like, it's like a barrage of propaganda from 50 different sources, and because it's from so many different sources, all the same message, they think they're free, and so, you know, it's very, it really consumes them, and
Yeah, the first shell to break is to get people to at least think about it with an open mind. I mean, they may look at the facts afterwards and still say, "No, you know what? I don't like the system. I think they should change it." But they're not even at the point where they can at least entertain the idea or entertain the facts or look at it in an honest way. But when you talk about people like this, do you find so obviously we covered the fact that you get a lot of hate, but do you find that you get once in a while you get people who say to you, "Thanks for making this. You know, I never really thought of it this way."
Definitely. Definitely. I've had people, you know, who's definitely, I get messages and emails and stuff where it's like, you know, thank you so much, or, you know, whatever it is, or exactly what you said, where it's like, oh, I never thought of it. Or like, I had one guy who's in Hong Kong who messaged me, and he's like, I didn't understand it until your video. And I was like, I mean, it was funny to me because it's like, I'm just some guy in Washington who just, you know, picked up what I could. You're actually there. But he's like, and so that like opened his eyes to like basically the US empire in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really rewarding to, you know, to get those kind of messages and know that like your work is making an impact and helping people, you know, understand their surroundings and reality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It is definitely. So we've been going on for a little while here, almost 2 hours. Wow, that time flew by. So, and what I want to maybe what we'll wrap up with is maybe say a little bit about what's next for you. What kinds of things are you working on? Where, you know, what's next?
Well, I'm working on this long-term documentary that I'm trying to finish in the next few months about the Israeli far right wing that wants to basically have this like apocalyptic war blow up the central mosque, basically the most important mosque in Jerusalem, is some kind of like fanatical apocalyptic thing. And they have actually a lot of power in the Israeli government. And so they used to be very fringe, and now they're kind of mainstream. They have mainstream support. So I'm working on that. Hopefully it'll be released this summer. And otherwise, you know, I'm really looking forward to kind of, you know, getting back to like journalism and you know, I mean, I really want to focus more on China and learn more about China, and hopefully I really I want to pour a cold one for me. No, I'm really looking forward to it. You know, it'll be challenging, you know, because we have our newborn baby right now, so I don't know when exactly I'll be able to travel. We'll have to figure that out. But I mean, China is like #1 on my list to come visit. So, and obviously it's a huge place, so there will be a lot more visits in order. But yeah, just, you know, working on my documentary, getting back to journalism, and hopefully do some traveling and raise my kid.
Yeah, awesome, exciting times, and in unprecedented times also.
Indeed.
So, yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks a lot, and we'll wrap it up here, and hopefully maybe we'll do another one again soon, and we'll put this up and get some feedback, and I'll put the links to your videos that you mentioned in the description as well.
All right. Thanks so much for having me, Daniel.
Thanks a lot. Take care.